The prophecy we hear from Jeremiah today gives us a vision of the sheer joy of being gathered up by God. A vision of God bringing people from every walk of life in order to save them. The haves and the have-nots, the young and the old, the blind and the lame, and all who have suffered. The prophecy goes on to describe the rejoicing and the dancing and the merriment and the comfort and the gladness when they arrive. The prophet says, "They shall come back from the land of the enemy, and there is hope for your future." Perhaps for us, the enemy is whatever it is that holds any one of us from living as beloved of God. The lofty prophecy takes us high above the details of our individual lives, as though we have been given a vantage point of the big picture of what's going on in God's overall plan. And then in this section of Mark, we drop down to where Jesus is, walking along dusty roads through villages. Mark takes us down into the nitty-gritty of individual lives and how each person along the way responds to Jesus. This mix of stories in chapters 8 through 10 in Mark is about miracles and healings and the call to discipleship. These stories are interspersed with 3 announcements by Jesus that he is on his way to Jerusalem, not to reach a destination toward political power or religious glory, but to reach his destination of breaking the human cycle of spiritual separation from God and estrangement from one another. He tells his disciples that to accomplish this, he must go through suffering and rejection and even death. And each time he tells them this, they correct him, they rebuke him, they argue about who has the greatest status among them. And they ask him if they can sit next to him when he comes into power and glory, an idea they just can't let go of. You could say they are blind. And each of the 3 times, Jesus states the paradox that those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for Jesus' sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. Common sense in the world we know makes Jesus' words sound so senseless. But all the way through this section, there are more riddles. What does it mean to gain the whole world and forfeit your life? Where do we live life, if not in the context of this world? Jesus presses on, trying to open the eyes of those who are with him. He reaches for hyperboles to startle them into hearing. And so Jesus at one point says, it's better to sever one of your hands or your feet or pluck out an eye than to sever yourself from the larger life you are invited into by God. The life you determine for yourself, by yourself, isn't all there is. You are part of that larger life God is calling you to, gathering you toward. Jesus' teachings go on. Those who see themselves as having gotten their own riches will find them poor in the riches of God. Those who want to preserve themselves with their possessions at all costs will find their life in God to have a short shelf life. The tighter we grasp for human relationships to complete our happiness and fulfill us, the looser our grasp on the eternal love of God. And the closer we are to fully abiding in God's love, the more flexibility we have in navigating our human relationships. When we seem to think that we can see it all, we are in fact blind. When we realize how little we understand, we begin to be able to see. Those who think they've made it are on the brink of falling, and those who know that the journey is lifelong always have a hopeful future before them. In chapter 10 of Mark, there are two stories that embody these paradoxical teachings. They are about two very different men and their encounters with Jesus. The first man we heard about a few weeks ago comes to Jesus and asks what he must do to inherit eternal life. He was a good man who had followed all of the good rules. And Jesus, looking on him, loved him and could see clearly what his blind spot was. It was his many possessions. Sell them, give the money to the poor, and follow me. But this reality shocked the man, and he couldn't allow his possessions to loosen their hold on him. He certainly couldn't loosen his hold on his possessions, so he went away grieving. The second man is our blind beggar, Bartimaeus, seated on the side of the road. Literally, in the original Greek, it says seated beside the way. He is in his usual place, just outside the city. He has a roughly spun cloak wrapped around his shoulders and then spread out before him to catch coins and crusts of bread from passersby. We can almost see its tatters and its holes. He hears from the shouts and the comments among the crowd that Jesus of Nazareth is on his way out of the city. And so the blind beggar shouts. He knows what he desperately wants. No matter that he is told to be quiet, he calls out even more loudly. Jesus stands still and says to those around him, "Call him here." And astounded at this, those near Bartimaeus tell him that Jesus is calling for him. He throws off his cloak, his only possession. By day it collects the bits of food and coins tossed to him, and by night it is his blanket, his shelter. I remember a man, an older man, who walked the streets pushing a shopping cart that held everything he owned. We can find individuals in Asheville and in every city that fit this description. The man was protective of his cart, and he would back up his cart to a wall when he needed sleep and cover the cart and himself with an old gray blanket. And the blanket would be tight around the cart and clutched by his hand, so if anyone tried to pull it away, he would wake up and be able to defend his belongings. Not Bartimaeus. Bartimaeus throws off his cloak. The coins lying on it bounce up and roll down the ground. He leaves everything he has and makes his way to Jesus. I can see that homeless man doing the same thing, his grocery cart rolling away from the wall and bouncing off the sidewalk and heading aimlessly out into the parking lot. Well, blind Bartimaeus gains his sight, and with it, so much more. He moves from sitting on the sidelines beside the way and follows Jesus on the way. Perhaps he was even among those who witnessed Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, which is the next scene in Mark's gospel. So the first person approached Jesus and asked a sincere, if not calculated, question. What must I do? And perhaps he also meant, what need I not have to do to inherit eternal life? And when he hears Jesus' prescription for him, he weighs his options and sadly goes on his way. Bartimaeus sticks his neck out, pleads for mercy, states his heart's desire with no conditions attached, and springs up toward his hope. Someone said it well about the way. To walk the way of Jesus is a journey forward through life, always toward becoming who God created each one of us to be. A journey outward to love and to serve. A journey inward toward union with God. And as it is a journey with Jesus that we share with fellow pilgrims, we can have the peace and joy of knowing that we will never walk the way alone. Jesus came down into our nitty-gritty context to tell us of the larger picture, the one the prophets speak of. And he didn't just talk about it with compelling stories and wise teachings. He lived it, showing us what life is like when we can get in touch with and enter into the movements of God and the call of God. You might coin it all with that saying, let go and let God. And Jesus says in so many ways, it's worth it. Take the risk. And perhaps our cloak, whatever it is, will drop to the ground behind us as we spring forward to join Jesus on the way.